The sandstorm hit without warning, turning the afternoon sky the color of old blood. Kael had been tracking the storm's approach for hours, watching the wall of red dust build on the western horizon. But he'd miscalculated its speed. Now it was upon him in his wagon, a rickety assemblage of salvaged wood and canvas stretched over a frame that had seen better decades, was taking a beating. He guided his draft beast, a six-legged creature called a strider, toward a cluster of rock formations jutting from the wasteland like broken teeth. The wind screamed, tearing at the canvas cover, threatening to lift the entire wagon off its wheels. Sand pelted his face like tiny knives. He pulled his scarf tighter and urged the strider faster. The rocks would provide some shelter, not much but enough to wait out the worst of it. He was securing the wagon when he saw the figure. At first he thought it was a trick of the storm shapes formed and dissolved in the swirling sand phantom images that vanished when you looked directly at them. But this shape remained huddled against the base of the largest rock formation, partially buried in accumulating sand. Kael hesitated. The smart thing was to secure his wagon and wait out the storm. Getting involved with someone else's problems in the scorched expanse was a good way to end up dead. But the figure wasn't moving, and Kael had learned long ago that ignoring suffering didn't make you safer. It just made you the kind of person who could ignore suffering. He fought his way through the wind to the rocks. Up close, he could see it was a person, definitely a person though, unlike any he'd encountered in his years crossing the wasteland. Their skin had a strange luminescent quality, even under the coating of red dust, and their features were finer than any wanderer's, more angular. Luminary, he realized with a jolt, one of the light dwellers from the crystal cities to the north. They were barely conscious, their breathing shallow and rapid. Blood had soaked through their clothing on the left side, expensive clothing Kael noticed made of fabric that seemed to shimmer even in the dim stormlight. Their hands were bound with wire that had cut deep into their wrists. Kael didn't hesitate this time. He cut the wire with his utility knife, then half-carried, half-dragged the luminary back to his wagon. The storm was reaching its peak, sand blasting everything, visibility reduced to almost nothing. He got the stranger inside just as a particularly violent gust threatened to tear the canvas roof completely off. Inside, the wagon was cramped but relatively protected. Kael lit his storm lamp, a clever device that burned oil without needing much oxygen, and got his first clear look at his unexpected passenger. They were female, he thought, though luminary gender markers were subtle, and he wasn't entirely sure. Her skin had that characteristic luminescent quality of her people, like pearl or opal, but it was muted now, grayed out in a way that suggested serious injury or illness. Her hair was the color of moonlight, thin and straight, cut shorter than he'd expected for someone wearing such expensive clothes. Her eyes were closed, but when they'd been opened during the brief moments of consciousness, they'd been the deep violet of twilight. The wound in her side was bad. Not immediately fatal, but it would become so without treatment. It looked like a blade wound, precise and deliberate. Someone had stabbed her and left her to die in the wasteland. Kael's wagon held everything he owned, which wasn't much. His bedroll, his tools, his trade goods, a small trunk of personal items, and his medical supplies. The latter were more extensive than most traders carried. He'd learned field medicine during his years with the caravan, back before the exile, and he'd kept the skills sharp because in the wasteland, medical knowledge was often more valuable than gold. He heated water on his small cooking stove and began cleaning the wound. The luminary stirred when he touched the injury, making a sound of pain that was almost musical. Their voices had harmonic qualities. Human vocal cords couldn't reproduce. But she didn't wake fully, which was probably for the best. This was going to hurt. The blade had gone deep, but had missed anything vital. Lucky, if you could call being stabbed and left for dead in a sandstorm lucky. He irrigated the wound, applied the antiseptic salve he'd traded for in the last settlement, and stitched it closed with neat, practiced movements. His hands were steady despite the wagon rocking in the wind. He bandaged her torso with clean linen, then covered her with his spare blanket. She was cold, colder than she should be. Luminary ran warm, normally their bodies generating their own light and heat. This one was dimming like a dying lamp. Kael added more fuel to his small heater and settled in to wait out the storm. There was nothing else he could do now. The luminary would either stabilize or she wouldn't. The wasteland didn't care which. The storm raged for 6 hours. Kael spent the time securing anything that might come loose, rationing his water. Storms like this could last for days, and he needed to be conservative and periodically checking on his unconscious passenger. Her breathing remained shallow but steady. Her skin stayed cold. When the storm finally died down to a dull roar, then to silence, it was evening. Kale climbed out to assess the damage. The wagon had held, though the canvas had several new tears he'd need to patch. The Strider had wedged itself between two rocks and was covered in a drift of sand, but otherwise unharmed. The wasteland stretched out in all directions, transformed by the storm into new patterns of dunes and exposed rock. And there, about half a mile to the south, barely visible in the fading light, was Aquatia Transport. It was half buried in sand, its hull scorched and torn. Whatever had brought it down, it hadn't been gentle. Kale stared at it for a long time, piecing together the story. The luminary had been on that transport. It had crashed or been shot down. Someone had survived long enough to stab her and leave her for dead, or maybe she'd been stabbed before the crash. Either way, she'd crawled or stumbled to the rocks, and the storm had buried her. He should investigate the wreck. There might be supplies, information, other survivors. But the sun was setting, and moving around the wasteland at night was dangerous. It could wait until morning. Back in the wagon, the luminary was stirring. Her eyes opened violet as he'd remembered, and fixed on him with surprising focus for someone who'd been unconscious for hours. Where? Her voice was hoarse, the musical quality fractured by pain and thirst. Safe, Kale said, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. You're in my wagon. I found you during the storm. You were injured. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and fell back. Her hand moved to her side, feeling the bandages. Easy, Kale said. You took a blade to the ribs. The stitches will hold, but only if you don't tear them. She stared at him, her expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and finally a kind of resigned wariness. You're Wanderer. It wasn't a question. His clothes, his wagon, his accent, everything marked him as one of the nomadic traders who crossed the wasteland. To the luminary, that meant primitive, untrustworthy, barely civilized. I am, Kale said evenly. And you're luminary, far from home and in no condition to be particular about who helps you. She flinched slightly at his directness. Luminary valued elaborate courtesy, formal speech, careful diplomacy. Wanderer bluntness was considered crude. I meant no offense, she said carefully, defaulting to formal patterns, despite her obvious discomfort. I am grateful for your assistance. Are you hungry? Kale asked, cutting through the formality. Thirsty and pain, she blinked at the rapid-fire questions. Yes, to all three. He poured water from his dwindling supply into a tin cup and helped her sit up enough to drink. She took small sips, wincing with each movement. When the cup was empty, he set about making food simple fare: dried meat, rehydrated in broth, flatbread, some preserved fruit. Nothing fancy but nutritious and easy to digest. She ate slowly, watching him the entire time with those unsettling violet eyes. He could see her taking in details of the wagon, cataloging everything, assessing threat levels and escape routes. Smart. He'd do the same in her position. The transport, she said finally. Did you? Saw it, half a mile south. I'll check it in the morning. Others may have survived. Others may have been the ones who stabbed you, Kale pointed out. She went very still. You noticed? Hard to miss. Blade wound hands bound with wire left in the wasteland to die. Someone wanted you dead and wanted it to look like the crash killed you. Perceptive. Survival skill out here. Want to tell me who you are and why someone tried to kill you? She studied him for a long moment. No. Fair enough. Do you have a name I can use? Another pause. Lyra. It was a lie. Kyle could hear it in the slight hesitation, the way her luminescence flickered when she said it. But he nodded like he believed her. Everyone was entitled to their secrets. I'm Kyle. Kyle. She repeated it carefully, testing the pronunciation. You live out here alone. I do. That's unusual for your people. I thought wanderers traveled in caravans. They do. I don't. She heard the finality in his voice and didn't push. They finished eating in silence. As the night deepened, Kale set up his bedroll on the floor of the wagon and gave Lyra the only proper sleeping space, a narrow platform that served as both bench and bed. She protested weakly some luminary custom about propriety and host obligations, but he ignored her. She was injured and he wasn't, and that was the end of the discussion. He lay awake for a long time listening to her breathing even out as she fell into exhausted sleep. Outside, the night sounds of the wasteland filtered through the canvas, the distant howl of sandcats, the skittering of smaller creatures, the eternal whisper of wind over stone. He'd saved her life. That much was clear. What wasn't clear was whether he'd just made a terrible mistake. Morning came with the brutal clarity of wasteland sun. Kale woke to find Lyra already awake, sitting up despite the obvious pain it caused her staring out the small window at the endless expanse of red sand and rock. "How do you stand it?" she asked without turning. "The emptiness, the silence." "How do you stand the crowds?" Kale countered, moving to check her bandages. "The noise, everyone always watching." She turned then, surprise flickering across her face. "You've been to the Crystal Cities once, didn't care for it." The bandages looked good, no fresh bleeding, no signs of infection yet. He replaced them with clean ones, noting that her skin was warming up, regaining some of its natural luminescence. Good signs. "I need to check the transport," he said. "See if there are supplies we can salvage. Water, medicine, food. I should come with you. You should rest. That wound needs at least 3 days before you should be walking around. There may be sensitive materials, documents, technology, things that shouldn't fall into—" She stopped herself. "Into the hands of a primitive wanderer," Kale finished dryly. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I apologize, that was true from your perspective." He started gathering supplies for the salvage run, empty containers for water bags, for anything useful. "I'm not offended. Your people think we're barely civilized. We think you're arrogant and obsessed with rules. Probably both perspectives have some truth. You're very direct. Wasteland doesn't reward subtlety. You say what you mean or people misunderstand and someone dies." He paused at the door. "I'll check the transport. If there are sensitive materials, I'll bring them back for you to sort." "Fair." She nodded slowly. "Fair." The walk to the transport took 20 minutes through sand that had been rearranged by the storm. The wreck was worse up close. The hull was torn open in multiple places, scorch marks suggesting weapons fire. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had shot it down. Kale approached carefully, watching for any signs of survivors or scavengers. The wasteland had its share of predators, both animal and human, and fresh wreckage attracted them like blood and water. The interior was a mess, bodies, 3 of them, all luminari, all dead. One had died in the crash, crushed by shifting cargo. The other 2 had been executed, clean shots to the head. Professional work. Kale felt his stomach turn. This wasn't random violence, this was assassination. He searched quickly but thoroughly. There was water, thank the wandering gods, in sealed containers that had survived the crash. Medical supplies more sophisticated than his own. Food concentrates. And yes, documents, data crystals, the kind of things that might be sensitive. He also found weapons. Military-grade energy rifles, the kind luminary security forces used. And in a locked compartment he had to force open, he found formal robes, the kind worn by high-ranking government officials. Expensive, elaborately decorated, marked with symbols he didn't recognize, but that clearly denoted status. His passenger wasn't just some random luminary. She was someone important. Important enough to assassinate. Important enough to go to significant effort to ensure she died. He gathered what he could carry: water first, always water, then medicine and food. He left the weapons, but took several data crystals in what looked like official documents sealed in protective cases. If Lyra wanted to keep secrets, that was her business. But he wasn't going to help anyone track her by leaving an obvious trail. Before he left, he used his small shovel to partially bury the bodies. It wasn't much, but it felt necessary. They deserved at least that much dignity. Back at the wagon, he found Lyra attempting to stand. She'd made it to her feet, but was swaying, one hand braced against the wall, her face pale with effort. "Stubborn," Kale observed, setting down his salvage. "Determined," she corrected, but she let him help her back to the sleeping platform. He showed her what he'd found: the water and supplies first, then the documents and data crystals. Her expression went carefully blank when she saw the latter. "Thank you," she said quietly. Discretion." There were bodies, 3 of them, executed. She closed her eyes. Meridian, Cochise, Talon, they were— She stopped, swallowed hard. "They were my detail, my protection. Didn't do a great job of it." No, because the threat came from inside, from someone they trusted. Her hands clenched into fists. Someone I trusted. KL sat down across from her. Want to tell me what's really going on? Why would you care, as you said I'm just some luminary far from home? Because someone tried very hard to kill you, and they might come looking to finish the job. If I'm harboring you, I'd like to know what I'm getting into. She studied him for a long moment, weighing something. Finally, she reached up and pulled something from inside her shirt, a chain with a medallion. The medallion was crystal-faceted and complex, glowing with internal light. When she held it up, it cast patterns on the wagon walls, symbols, and designs that seemed to shift and change. Do you know what this is? She asked. No. It's the seal of the High Arbiter. There are only 7 in existence. I am Ceres Voluminora, Third Arbiter of the Council of Light, responsible for diplomatic relations with external peoples and the enforcement of treaty agreements. Kale stared at her. High Arbiter. That was several steps below the actual ruling council, but it was still incredibly high-ranking. The kind of position where your assassination would have political ramifications that rippled across nations. Well, he said after a moment, shit. Despite everything, she laughed. It was a startled, slightly hysterical sound, but genuine. Yes, accurately summarized. Who wants you dead? I don't know for certain, but I was traveling to the border settlements to negotiate a treaty revision. There are factions within the council who oppose any accommodation with outlanders, who believe the luminary should remain isolated, superior, untouched by outside influence. Let me guess, your assassination would be blamed on outlanders, used as justification to shut down the borders completely. Very perceptive. Not really, it's an old strategy. Create the crisis you need to justify the response you want. She leaned back, exhausted from the brief conversation. I need to get word to the council, to my allies. But I can't use standard communication. It could be intercepted, could alert whoever orchestrated this that I survived. Nearest settlement with long-range communication is Bitter Springs. 4 days travel east. 4 days. If we push hard and the weather holds, could be longer if we hit another storm. Kale shrugged. You can't travel alone in your condition. And leaving you here would be leaving you to She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why are you helping me? Your people and mine aren't exactly friendly. Helping people in trouble is what decent people do. Doesn't matter if you're luminary, wanderer, or sandcat. You needed help, I could provide it. End of calculation. That's refreshingly simple. Life's complicated enough without adding philosophy to basic decency. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. KL drove the wagon during the cooler morning and evening hours, resting during the brutal midday heat. Ceres, she'd admitted her real name on the second day, said that lying to someone who'd saved your life twice was poor form, recovered slowly but steadily. She was a terrible patient, used to giving orders and having them followed, unused to being helpless or dependent. She tried to help with everything, despite her injury, managing supplies, navigating, even attempting to handle the strider, which ended with the animal giving her a disdainful look and refusing to move until Kyle took over. But she learned. Watched how Kyle handled the wagon, the animal, the constant adjustments needed for wasteland travel. Asked questions about survival techniques, about the patterns of weather and terrain, about the social structures of the settlements they might encounter. In return, she taught him about luminary culture, explained the complex web of obligations and honor debts that govern their society, described the crystal cities with their light sculpted architecture and harmonic resonance chambers, talked about the Council of Light and its centuries-old mandate to preserve luminary purity and superiority. You don't agree with that mandate, Kale observed one evening as they shared a meal. The superiority part. I think we have much to offer: advanced technology, sophisticated governance systems, centuries of accumulated knowledge. But superiority. She shook her head. That implies others are inferior. And I've never seen evidence that technical advancement correlates with moral or ethical superiority. Probably why someone tried to kill you. Probably. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. A wasteland quirk, the same desert that baked you during the day, could freeze you at night. Kyle built up the heater, but Ceres was still shivering, her luminescence dimming in a way that suggested she was struggling to maintain her core temperature. Luminary ran warm normally, but her injury had destabilized something in her system. She needed heat she couldn't generate herself. Come here, Kale said, shifting his bedroll. What? You're freezing. I can feel it from over here. Shared body heat is more efficient than trying to heat the whole wagon. That's practical, he finished. Whatever luminary protocols say about physical proximity, they were written for people who weren't injured and stranded in the wasteland. Come here before you freeze. She hesitated, pride and practicality warring visibly on her face. Practicality won. She moved carefully to his bedroll, and he wrapped the blankets around both of them. She was cold, colder than any living person should be, but within minutes his warmth began to transfer to her, and her shivering eased. Thank you, she murmured. Sleep. Long day tomorrow. But she didn't sleep immediately. Instead, she asked, why do you live alone? You mentioned caravans earlier, but you're not with one. Kale was quiet for a long time. I made a choice my caravan didn't agree with. They exiled me. What choice? There was a settlement, mixed population wanderers, a few luminary refugees, some others. They needed help, supplies, medicine. The caravan leader said it wasn't our problem, that getting involved would anger the luminary government, that we should move on. I disagreed. Loudly, repeatedly. You helped them anyway. I did. Took supplies, left in the middle of the night, spent 2 weeks getting the settlement stabilized. By the time I came back, the caravan had moved on and left word at the next settlement that I was cast out. You gave up your community for strangers. I did what was right. The caravan did what was safe. Both decisions have costs. She was quiet for another long moment. Do you regret it? I regret the loss, the isolation, but not the choice. Never the choice. I understand that, she said softly, regretting consequences while standing by decisions. It's the burden of leadership. You lead well. I try. My people respect strength and clarity. They value tradition and order. I value those things too, but I also value adaptation and growth. It makes me controversial. Controversial enough to assassinate. Apparently. They fell silent then, and eventually Kyle felt her breathing even out into sleep. He lay awake longer, very aware of her presence, of the trust implied in her willingness to be this vulnerable with him, of the strange intimacy of shared warmth in the cold night. He'd been alone for 3 years. He'd thought he'd gotten used to it, to the silence and the solitude. But having someone else in his space, someone to talk to, someone who listened when he spoke and challenged him when he was wrong, it reminded him of what he'd lost when the caravan cast him out. It would hurt when she left. And she would leave. She was High Arbiter Ceres Voluminor, a third of the Council of Light. He was Kyle, exiled wanderer, owner of one rickety wagon and a stubborn strider. Their paths crossed by accident and would diverge by necessity. But for now, in this moment, she was here and alive and warm against his side, and that would have to be enough. On the 4th day, they reached Bitter Springs. The settlement was built around a natural oasis, one of the few reliable water sources in this part of the wasteland. Approximately 300 people called it home, a mix of wanderers who'd settled down, outlanders from various nations, and a handful of luminary refugees who'd fled the crystal cities for reasons of their own. The settlement had one major advantage: a communication relay station maintained by a consortium of trading companies who paid for the privilege of sending messages across the wasteland network. For a price, you could send word anywhere in the known world. Kyle guided the wagon into the public stable, paid for space and food for the strider, and helped Ceres down. She was moving better now, the wound healing cleanly, but she was still weak and couldn't move quickly. The relay station is in the center of town, Kale said, but we should get you somewhere secure first. There's an inn, nothing fancy but clean and safe. No, Ceres's voice was firm. The message needs to go out immediately. Every hour I delay increases the chance that whoever orchestrated the assassination attempt consolidates power. You can barely walk. I can walk well enough, and this is not negotiable. They argued about it for a few minutes, but Ceres was unmovable. Finally, Kyle sighed and offered his arm for support, and they made their way to the relay station. The station operator, an elderly wanderer woman named Kessa, looked up when they entered and did a double take when she saw Ceres. High Arbiter, she said, and it wasn't a question. We heard about the transport crash. The official reports said there were no survivors. The official reports are incorrect, Ceres said. I need to send a message. Encrypted highest priority to Counselor Vetra at the council chambers. That'll be expensive. Priority encryption that distance? I'll pay, Sarah said and produced a small pouch from inside her clothing. Inside were high-denomination credit chips, the kind that could fund a small settlement for a year. Kessa's eyes widened. Right, yes, of course. If you'll just... The encryption keys are in the private booth. Saris moved toward the booth, then paused and looked back at Kale. Wait for me. I'll be here. She disappeared into the booth. Through the small window, Kale could see her working at the controls, her fingers moving with practiced precision across the interface. This was her world communication diplomacy, the complex web of politics and power. He waited in the main room accepting a cup of bitter tea from Kessa, who kept shooting him curious glances. You know who she is? Kessa asked quietly. I do now. And you helped her, knowing what it would mean, the complications. I helped her before I knew, and after I knew didn't change anything. She needed help. Decent of you. Basic decency isn't something you get credit for. It's just baseline. Tell that to most people. Saris emerged from the booth 20 minutes later, looking exhausted but satisfied. It's sent. Vera will receive it within the hour. She'll know what to do. Good. Now can we get you somewhere to rest before you collapse? I suppose that would be practical. The inn was small but well-maintained, run by a former wanderer who'd married a local and settled down. The proprietor took one look at Saris, clearly recognizing her status, if not her specific identity, and provided the best room without question. It was a far cry from what Saris was probably used to. A simple bed, a chair, a small table, a window overlooking the settlement square. But it was clean and secure and had a door that locked. I'll get supplies, Kale said. Food, water, medical materials to change your bandages. Then I'll... Stay, Saris interrupted. Please, at least for tonight, She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I don't want to be alone, not yet. Kale understood that. The crash, the assassination attempt, the days of recovery, it was all catching up to her now that the immediate crisis was over. Delayed shock. I'll stay, he said. He went out only long enough to secure his wagon and gather necessities, then returned to find Saris sitting by the window staring out at the settlement with an expression of profound weariness. Response already, he asked. Yes, Counselor Vera confirms my suspicions. There was a coup attempt. My faction was targeted specifically. 3 other arbiters dead or missing. The council is in chaos. But you're alive. That changes the calculus. It does. Vera is rallying loyalists, but it will take time to stabilize the situation. Time I need to spend in hiding, recovering until it's safe to return. How long? Weeks, maybe months, and I can't stay here. Too visible, too easy to find if they're looking. Kale sat down across from her. You could come with me. She turned surprise clear on her face. What? My wagon. It's small and uncomfortable and nothing like what you're used to. But it moves. It's anonymous. No one looks twice at a wanderer trader. We could keep moving through the settlement, staying ahead of anyone looking for you until it's safe for you to return home. You're offering to shelter a fugitive high arbiter for potentially months. I'm offering to help someone who needs it, again. Seems to be a pattern with me. It would be dangerous. If they found out you were harboring me, they won't. I know the wasteland. I know how to move without being tracked. And I've got nothing better to do. She stared at him. Why would you do this? Cal thought about his answer. He could say it was just practical, that he was already involved, so might as well see it through. He could say it was moral obligation, that leaving her now would be abandoning someone in need. Both would be true. But there was another truth harder to acknowledge. In the days they'd spent together, something had shifted. She wasn't just a patient or a passenger anymore. She was someone he wanted around. Someone whose presence made the silence of the wagon feel less empty. Someone who challenged him and listened to him and saw him as more than just an exiled nobody. Because I like having you around, he said finally, because the wagon feels less lonely with you in it. Because I think you're brilliant and brave and stubborn, and I want to see how this story ends. That honest enough, she blinked several times, her luminescence flickering in a way he'd learned meant strong emotion. Kale, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. Get some rest. We can talk in the morning. But she crossed the space between them, moving carefully because of her injury, and took his hands in hers. Hers were warmer now, nearly back to normal temperature, glowing faintly with internal light. In luminary culture, she said quietly, there is a concept called revashar. It translates roughly to debt of essence. When someone saves your life, you owe them not just material repayment, but a piece of your essential self. You become bound to them in ways that transcend obligation. I don't want your debt, Cirrus. I just want, let me finish. Revashar is considered sacred because it acknowledges that we are shaped by those who save us, who see us at our most vulnerable and choose to help anyway. You have shaped me, Kael. You have seen me at my weakest and treated me with kindness and respect and honesty. You have given me sanctuary and asked nothing in return. That is rare. In my world, everything is transaction politics, careful calculation. You calculate differently. I just do what's right. Exactly. And that's extraordinary. She squeezed his hands gently. I would be honored to travel with you. Not because of revachar or obligation, but because I cannot imagine anywhere I would rather be than with someone who sees the world the way you do. Cale felt something warm unfold in his chest, something he hadn't let himself feel in 3 years of exile. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or just the simple joy of being chosen by someone who mattered. Then we're agreed, he said. Partners, until it's safe for you to go home. Partners, she agreed and smiled in a way that made her luminescence brighten, filling the small room with soft light. They stayed in Bitter Springs for 3 more days, while Saris recovered her strength and Kael restocked his supplies. During that time, messages came through from Counselor Vera. The situation in the Crystal Cities was stabilizing, but remained volatile. Saris's enemies were claiming she died in the crash, using it as justification for emergency powers. Vera was fighting back, but needed time to gather proof that Saris was alive and build support for her faction. Time that Saris would spend in exile traveling the wasteland with a wanderer trader who'd saved her life. On the 4th day they left at dawn, Kael guided the wagon west away from the Crystal Cities, deeper into the less traveled parts of the wasteland. Saris sat beside him on the driver's bench, a first she'd always ridden inside before watching the landscape unfold. It's strange, she said after several hours of silence. I've spent my entire life in structures made of crystal and light, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people. And now I'm in a wooden wagon in the middle of nowhere with one person. And I feel, free. For the first time in my life, no one is watching, no one is judging, no one is calculating my words for political advantage. I can just be. Welcome to the wasteland, Kael said. It's terrible and beautiful and completely indifferent to politics. She laughed, and the sound was becoming familiar, now less startling. I think I'm going to like it here. They fell into comfortable silence, the wagon rolling steadily west, the sun climbing higher, the wasteland stretching endlessly in all directions. And Kael realized that for the first time since his exile, he wasn't traveling alone. He had a partner, a companion, someone who chose to be here not out of obligation but out of genuine desire. It wouldn't last forever. Eventually the situation would stabilize and Saris would return to her world of crystal cities and political maneuvering. But for now, this moment she was here. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The first week of traveling together established patterns. Kael drove during the cooler hours dawn until mid-morning, then late afternoon until after sunset. During the brutal midday heat, they sheltered under canvas stretched between the wagon and rock formations when available, or simply endured the stifling interior of the wagon when not. Saris was healing well, her luminescence returning to its natural brightness. She insisted on helping despite Kael's protests, taking over navigation duties, managing their supply inventory, even learning to handle the strider during rest periods. The animal remained skeptical of her, but had stopped actively resisting her commands, which Kael considered progress. They talked. Hours of conversation as the wagon rolled across endless sand and stone. Saris described the crystal cities in detail, the way they were grown rather than built crystal lattices shaped by harmonic resonance into towers and bridges and gardens of pure light. She explained the caste system that governed luminary society, where your family determined your opportunities, where innovation was viewed with suspicion, where tradition held power that couldn't be challenged without significant cost. "I was born into the ruling caste," she said one evening as they made camp. "My family has held council positions for 6 generations. My path was determined before I could walk specific education, specific mentors, specific trajectory toward power. I fulfilled all the requirements, exceeded them in most cases, but I never got to choose." "What would you have chosen?" Kale asked, stirring the stew they were making from dried provisions and some edible roots he'd found. "I don't know. That's the terrible part. I'm so shaped by expectation that I can't separate what I want from what I was taught to want. Do I genuinely care about diplomatic relations, or did I just excel at it because that was the role assigned to me? Does it matter if you're good at it and it accomplishes something worthwhile?" Philosophy question. If you're forced into a role but end up performing it well, is that fulfillment or just successful conditioning? KL considered this. "I think fulfillment comes from choosing to stay, not from how you got there. You could have rebelled, refused the path chosen exile. You didn't. That's a choice. Passive acceptance isn't the same as active choice, isn't it? Every day you don't leave is a day you choose to stay. Every decision you make within the role is your choice. You're not a puppet. You're someone working within constraints, same as everyone." She looked at him with an expression he was learning to recognize surprised respect for perspectives she hadn't considered. The philosophers in the crystal cities spend years debating questions like this. You just cut straight to pragmatic truth. Wasteland doesn't care about philosophical nuance. You choose or you don't. You act or you don't. Everything else is just noise. I think I prefer your clarity to their complexity. On the 10th day, they encountered their first real problem. Kale spotted the dust trail around midday, 3, maybe 4 riders moving fast from the northeast. In the wasteland, that usually meant trouble. Honest travelers moved at sustainable speeds. People in a hurry were either running from something or chasing something. "We have company," he said quietly to Saris, who was studying one of the data crystals she'd salvaged from the crash. She looked up, saw the dust trail, and went very still. "How far?" "Hour, maybe less if they're pushing hard. Could be random, could be hunters." "Hunters. Bounty hunters, scavengers, raiders. Anyone who makes living from other people's misfortune." He was already adjusting their course, angling toward a cluster of mesas he knew offered multiple escape routes. "Get inside the wagon. Cover yourself with supplies. If they stop us, you're cargo, not a passenger." "Kyle. Now Saris, please." The urgency in his voice moved her. She climbed into the back and he heard her rearranging supplies to create a hiding space. Good. He pushed the strider to a faster pace, not running that would attract attention, but moving with purpose. The riders caught up anyway. 4 of them mounted on stripped-down speeders rather than striders, faces covered with cloth against the dust. They spread out in a loose formation, flanking the wagon, and Kyle felt his stomach sink. Professional positioning. These weren't random raiders. The lead rider pulled alongside. "Stop your wagon!" Kale complied, bringing the strider to a halt. He kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed. No sudden movements, no threats. "Trading route," he said calmly, "heading west to the settlement at Broken Rock. No trouble here." "We're looking for someone," the rider said. Female voice, cold and professional. "Luminary, high-ranking. She was in a transport that crashed 8 days ago. Intelligence suggests she survived." "Haven't seen any luminary," Kale said truthfully. He hadn't seen Saris when he'd found her. She'd been barely visible under the dust and shadow. "Crashed transport was stripped clean when I passed it. Bodies already gone. Assumed scavengers got there first." "Mind if we search your wagon?" Kale minded very much, but saying so would make them suspicious. "Help yourself. Not much to see. Some trade goods, personal supplies. Don't damage anything. I can't afford to replace it." 2 of the riders dismounted and moved toward the wagon. Kale stayed on the driver's bench, forcing himself to remain calm while his mind raced. Saris was hidden, but not well enough to survive a thorough search. If they found her, the first rider climbed into the wagon. Kale heard things being moved, supplies shifted. Long minutes passed. "Found something," the rider called out. Kale's heart stopped. The rider emerged holding one of Saris's data crystals, the ones containing official documents. "This is Luminary Tech, high-grade encryption. How'd a wanderer trader get his hands on this?" Salvage, Kale said. Pulled it from the wreck. Figured I could sell it to a tech dealer in one of the settlements. Worth something. The lead rider studied him. This isn't random salvage. This is government property. Possession alone is a serious crime in luminary territory. Good thing we're not in luminary territory. You're a smartass. I don't like smartasses. I don't like people searching my wagon without payment, but here we are. The tension stretched. One of the other riders had his hand on a weapon not drawn but ready. Kyle calculated odds and didn't like them. 4 armed professionals against 1 trader with a utility knife. If this went violent, he'd lose. Then Saris's voice came from inside the wagon, pitched lower than normal, accent carefully neutral. Boss, we got trouble or just shakedown? The riders spun toward the voice. Kale's mind raced. What was she doing? Saris emerged from the wagon, and Kale barely recognized her. She'd covered her luminescent skin with dirt and ash, masking the distinctive glow. She'd changed into a spare clothes rough trader garb that hung loose on her frame. Her posture was different, less aristocratic, more rough-edged. She looked like a wasteland refugee, someone down on their luck, not a high arbiter. Shakedown, Kale said, catching on. Looking for salvage from that luminary crash. Figures. Sarah spat into the sand, a gesture of disgust that was pure wasteland culture. Told you we should have left that fancy tech alone. Brings nothing but trouble. It would have bought supplies. It bought us raiders sticking their noses in our wagon. That what you wanted? They argued, bickering like partners who'd been on the road too long while the hunters watched. Finally, the lead rider held up a hand. Enough, we'll take the crystal as evidence. You two keep moving and forget you saw us. If we find out you're hiding information. She let the threat hang. No information to hide, Kale said. Just trying to make a living out here. The hunters took the data crystal and left their speeders kicking up dust as they headed northeast. Kale waited until they were completely out of sight before he exhaled. That was dangerous and stupid. Ceres finished climbing back onto the driver's bench. But they were going to search thoroughly. I couldn't stay hidden without them finding the compartment. So you came out disguised as my partner. Seemed like the most believable option. Wasteland traders often travel in pairs. You don't wear a pair bond marker, so I assumed you were unattached. She was brushing the dirt off her skin, her luminescence returning as the ash fell away. Was the accent convincing? I've been studying the dialectical patterns. It was perfect. Terrifying, but perfect. Kale got the wagon moving again, pushing the strider to a faster pace. Those were professionals. Bounty hunters probably hired by whoever tried to kill you. The crystal they took wasn't important financial record supply manifests. Nothing that could compromise security. I have the critical documents hidden better. Still, they're looking for you, actively hunting. That changes things. Does it change your willingness to help me? Kale glanced at her. She cleaned most of the dirt off but had missed a streak along her jaw. Without thinking, he reached over and brushed it away. She went very still at the contact. No, he said. Just means we need to be more careful. She caught his hand before he could pull it back, her fingers warm against his. KL, if this becomes too dangerous, if keeping me with you puts you at risk. I've been at risk since I found you. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Why? And don't say it's just basic decency. There's more to it than that. He could have deflected, changed the subject. But she'd been honest with him, vulnerable with him. She deserved the same. Because in 3 years of exile, you're the first person who's seen me as more than just a traitor or an outcast. You listen when I talk. You challenge my ideas without dismissing them. You treat me like an equal even though you're high arbiter and I'm nobody. And He paused, searching for the right words. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Saris's luminescence brightened a flush of light that he'd learned indicated strong emotion. You're not nobody. You're KL. You're the man who cut me down from a trap without hesitation, who gave me his bed and his food and asked nothing in return, who treats high philosophical concepts with practical wisdom, who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me feel safe in ways I never have before. Saris, I'm supposed to return to the Crystal Cities, resume my position, continue the work of diplomacy and treaty negotiation. That's my duty, my purpose. what I've trained for my entire life. She turned to face him, fully still holding his hand. But the thought of leaving this wagon, leaving you, feels like losing something essential. Like cutting away a part of myself I didn't know existed until you showed it to me. They stared at each other. The wagon rolled on the strider, finding its own path, while neither of them paid attention to the reins. This is complicated, Kale said finally. Monumentally. You're High Arbiter. I'm Exiled Wanderer. There's no world where that's simple. I know. We should probably be practical. Keep this professional. Protect ourselves from getting hurt when you eventually have to leave. We should, Shrees agreed. Neither of them moved away. But I don't want to be practical, Kale admitted. I want to be stupidly, recklessly honest about the fact that I'm falling for you. That I have been since you first smiled at my terrible cooking. That every day with you feels like finding something I didn't know I was missing. Saris's free hand came up to cup his face, her palm warm against his cheek. The luminary have a saying, light finds light in darkness. It means that true connection transcends circumstance. That some bonds form not despite difficulty, but because of it. And is this a bond? I don't know what else to call it. I only know that when I think about the future, you're in it. And I don't care if that's illogical or impractical or impossible. It's true. Kale leaned into her touch. So what do? We keep going. We stay together as long as we can. We don't make promises about forever because we can't keep them. But we choose each other for as long as the universe allows it. That's terrifying. Everything worthwhile is. He kissed her then, or she kissed him later. Neither could remember who moved first. It didn't matter. What mattered was the warmth of her mouth against his, the way her luminescence brightened until they were both bathed in soft light, the feeling of rightness that settled into his bones. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale realized the strider had stopped moving and was giving them a look of profound disdain, as if disgusted by the display. Saris laughed bright and unguarded. I think your animal disapproves. The strider disapproves of everything. It's her defining characteristic. They got the wagon moving again, but everything had shifted. Saris moved closer on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. Kale found himself hyper-aware of every point of contact, every shared breath. This doesn't solve our problems, Saris said after a while. The bounty hunters, the political situation, the fact that I'm supposed to return home. I know, but it's honest. That's something. It is. They traveled through the afternoon in comfortable silence, occasionally broken by conversation about route planning or supply management. Practical things, normal things. But underneath ran a current of awareness of possibility of change. That night they made camp in a sheltered canyon, the wagon tucked against the rock wall where it would be invisible from above. Kale built a small fire, risky, but the temperature was dropping fast and they needed the heat. Saris sat across from him, the firelight playing across her features, making her luminescence shimmer. Tell me about your exile. The real story. You mentioned helping a settlement, but there's more to it. Kyle poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks drift upward. The settlement was called Hope's End. Terrible name, but the founders had a dark sense of humor. Mixed population, like I said, they'd been hit by a plague, nothing fatal to healthy adults, but devastating to children and the elderly. They needed medicine we had in the caravan, specific antibiotics that were hard to synthesize in wasteland conditions. Your caravan leader refused to help. Refused because helping meant entering luminary territory without authorization. The settlement was technically on the border, but the luminary government considered it theirs. If we went in, we'd be violating treaty agreements. Could have led to trade sanctions, loss of travel permits, all kinds of complications. So you went alone. I took supplies worth about 3 years of savings. Everything I'd been stockpiling to eventually buy my own wagon and go independent. Arrived at Hope's End, distributed the medicine, showed their medical staff how to synthesize more from available materials. Spent 2 weeks making sure they could stabilize. The caravan punished you for compassion. They punished me for making a unilateral decision that could have endangered everyone. From their perspective, I was reckless and selfish. Put my desire to be a hero above the community's safety. Do you think they were right? Kale considered this. I think they were right that I took a risk with their resources and reputation. But I also think they were wrong to prioritize politics over lives. Both things can be true. You don't resent them. I resent the outcome, but I understand their choice. He looked up at her. Same as I understand why you'll eventually have to return to the Crystal Cities. Your duty is to your people. That's not wrong, it's just painful. Saris moved around the fire to sit beside him close enough that he could feel her warmth. You're very wise for someone who claims to avoid philosophy. Not wisdom, just experience watching people make hard choices and realizing there's rarely a perfect answer. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone? Anything. I don't want to go back. I know I have to. I know my people need me, that the political situation requires my presence, that abandoning my post would be the height of irresponsibility. But I don't want to. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. For the first time in my life, I want something selfish. I want to stay here in this wagon with you. I want to keep traveling the wasteland and arguing about philosophy and learning to drive that damn Strider. I want simple and complicated and real instead of performative and political and endlessly calculated. Kale put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. How long do you have before you have to decide? Counselor Vera estimates another month before the situation stabilizes enough for my return to be safe. After that, she trailed off. After that, you go home. Resume your position. Save your people from whoever tried to kill you. And you go back to traveling alone. Continue your exile. Live the life you've built. Yes. They sat in silence, both understanding what wasn't being said. This was temporary, a moment stolen from their respective responsibilities, beautiful and doomed in equal measure. 1 month, Sarah said finally. We have 1 month where we don't have to think about after, where we can just be this partners, travelers, whatever we're becoming. After that, we face reality. But for now we have this, Kale finished. She turned in his arms and kissed him again, slower this time, deeper. He responded without hesitation, one hand tangling in her moonlight hair, the other resting against her lower back. She was warm everywhere they touched, her luminescence brightening until the canyon glowed with soft light. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Saris rested her forehead against his. I should probably return to my own bedroll. Maintain some propriety. Probably. But I don't want to. Then don't. They spent the night together, not sleeping so much as existing in shared space, talking quietly about small things and large things and nothing at all. Kale had forgotten what it was like to fall asleep with someone beside you, to wake in the night and feel another person's warmth, to share the vulnerable hours when all pretense dropped away. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely worth whatever pain would come when it ended. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. They traveled during safe hours, avoided settlements where Saris might be recognized, and slowly made their way west toward the deep wasteland where even bounty hunters rarely ventured. Kale taught Saris practical skills: how to repair wagon wheels, how to find water in seemingly dry terrain, how to read weather patterns. Saris taught Kale about luminary culture and politics, about the intricate web of alliances and obligations that governed her world. They grew comfortable with each other in ways that went beyond attraction, learned each other's rhythms and preferences, discovered that Saris was terrible at cooking, but excellent at organizing supplies that Kale could navigate by stars, but struggled with written maps that they both preferred sunrise to sunset and valued silence as much as conversation. They also learned each other physically carefully, given Saris's healing wound, but with growing confidence. The intimacy was new for both of them in different ways. Saris had been trained to view physical relationships as political tools, negotiations of power and alliance. Kale had been alone for 3 years and celibate for longer. Together they figured out what it meant to touch someone without agenda, to be vulnerable, without fear, to choose each other repeatedly and without reservation. But underneath everything ran the countdown. 4 weeks became 3, then 2, then 1. On the 28th day, a message arrived at a relay station they passed through. Counselor Vera had secured enough support to guarantee Saris's safety. The coup attempt had failed. The conspirators were arrested. It was time for the High Arbiter to come home. Saris read the message 3 times, her expression carefully neutral. Then she handed it to Kale without a word. He read it, felt something crack in his chest, handed it back. When he asked, 3 days, there's a transport coming to the crossing station. That's 2 days travel from here. I could meet it, return to the Crystal Cities, resume my duties. You should go. Your people need you. I know. They stood in the relay station surrounded by the noise of other travelers and said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make this harder. That night they made camp in silence. Built the fire, prepared food, went through all the familiar routines while the weight of departure pressed down on them. Finally, as the stars came out, Ceres spoke. Come with me. Kael looked up from the fire. What? Come with me, to the Crystal Cities, not as a servant or a subordinate, as my partner, my advisor, my, she struggled for the word, my chosen one. There's no exact translation, but it's the closest thing Luminary culture has to an acknowledged consort. Ceres, I'm wanderer, an exile. I don't belong in your world. You belong where you choose to be, and I'm choosing you, if you'll have me. Kael's heart was racing. What about your people, the ones who tried to kill you because you were too sympathetic to Outlanders? What would they do if you brought a wanderer to the council chambers? Be angry, protest, probably challenge my fitness to lead. She moved to sit beside him. But I've realized something these past weeks. I can't lead effectively if I'm constantly compromising who I am to satisfy others' expectations. You've taught me that, shown me what it means to make choices based on conviction rather than political calculation. This isn't a small choice, Ceres. This is asking your people to accept someone they view as inferior, primitive, barely civilized. Then they'll learn to expand their definitions, the same way I did. She took his hand. I'm not promising it will be easy. It will be difficult and complicated and probably painful at times. But I think we can do difficult things. We've proven that already. Kael wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly he could taste it. But he also understood the pattern. If I come with you, I stop being me. I become the wanderer consort, the curiosity, the scandal. Everything I do reflects on you. Every mistake I make undermines your authority. I become a political liability you have to constantly defend. Or you become proof that the boundaries we've built between peoples are artificial. That capability and worth aren't determined by birth or culture. That the luminary can learn from those we've dismissed as lesser. You're asking me to be a symbol. I'm asking you to be yourself in a place that needs exactly that. To show them what I've learned, that wisdom comes in unexpected forms, that kindness is strength, that the wasteland produces people of profound value if you're willing to look. They sat in silence, hands clasped, both knowing this was the moment everything hinged on. I need to think about it, Kael said finally. It's everything. I need time. We have 2 days, Sarah said. Think, decide, I'll support whatever you choose. But Kael, she turned to face him fully. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you. You. The man who cuts people down from traps without hesitation. Who makes terrible tea and brilliant observations. Who treats everyone with the same baseline decency regardless of status. Who makes me want to be braver than I am. I love you and I want you with me, but only if that's what you want too. I love you too, he said, because not saying it was impossible. I just don't know if love is enough. Then figure out what else you need and tell me in 2 days. They held each other through the night, not speaking, just existing together in the time they had left. In the morning, they would start the journey to Crossing Station. In 2 days, they would decide whether this was an ending or a transformation. For now, they had this moment, this night, this shared warmth in the cold wasteland darkness. The journey to Crossing Station took them through terrain Kael knew well, a series of canyons that offered protection from the sun and cover from prying eyes. They traveled in near silence, both wrapped in their own thoughts, the weight of the approaching decision hanging between them like a physical presence. On the first day, they stopped for the midday rest in a canyon with walls that rose hundreds of feet on either side, striped in layers of red and ochre stone. Ceres climbed down from the wagon and walked to the canyon wall, running her fingers over the ancient rock. These formations are millions of years old, she said quietly. Layers of sediment compressed over time, creating something permanent, something that endures. Kael joined her, understanding she wasn't really talking about geology. Nothing is permanent, even stone erodes eventually. But it endures long enough to matter, long enough to shape the landscape around it. She turned to him. I'm not asking for forever, Kale. I don't think anyone can promise that honestly. I'm asking for endurance, for choosing to shape something together even knowing it will be difficult. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever considered. Walking away from you would be easier in some ways, less complicated, less risky, less likely to end in spectacular failure. But I don't want easier. I want true. Kyle leaned against the canyon wall beside her. In the 3 years since my exile, I've learned to be self-sufficient. Not just physically, I can handle the wasteland, find water, navigate storms, but emotionally, I stopped needing people. Stopped letting myself want connection because wanting it and not having it was too painful. And now I want again, and it terrifies me. Because if I go with you and it doesn't work, if I can't adapt to your world, if I become a liability instead of a partner, if the pressure breaks us, I don't know if I could survive losing you after having had you. Saris took his hand, lacing their fingers together. That fear is proof this matters. If it were easy to walk away, it wouldn't be worth keeping. Philosopher, he accused gently. Wanderer, she countered with a slight smile, teaching me to value directness and then being maddeningly indirect about what you actually want. What I want is impossible. I want you in freedom. I want partnership and autonomy. I want to be with you without losing myself. Why do you assume those things are mutually exclusive? Because your world has rules, hierarchies, expectations. I'd be entering as your consort, which means defined by my relationship to you rather than by who I am independently. Then we change the definition. Make the role fit you rather than forcing you to fit the role. She squeezed his hand. I have influence, Kyle, power. I can use it to create space for you to be yourself. But you have to want to come. You have to choose it, not just agree because you think it's what I want to hear. I need more time to think. You have until tomorrow evening. The transport arrives at dawn the day after. They resumed traveling, but the conversation had opened something between them, not resolution, but honest acknowledgement of the stakes. That night, they camped at the entrance to the canyon system, where the walls opened onto a view of the western wasteland, stretching endlessly into darkness. Ko couldn't sleep. He lay in his bedroll, staring at the stars visible through gaps in the canvases, his mind running in circles. Every argument for going had a counter-argument. Every fear had a corresponding hope. He heard movement and turned to see Saris sitting up, her luminescence providing soft light in the darkness. Can't sleep either, he asked. Too much thinking. She moved to sit beside him. Can I tell you what I'm afraid of? Always. I'm afraid I'm being selfish, that I'm asking you to uproot your entire life because I don't want to be alone, that I'm dressing up desire as political necessity when really I just can't bear the thought of going back to that world without you. That's honest. I'm also afraid that if you come, I won't be able to protect you, that my enemies will target you to get to me, that you'll be hurt because of choices I made before we even met. Her voice dropped. And I'm afraid that you'll come to resent me for taking you away from the life you built here, the freedom you fought for. Kyle sat up, pulling her into his arms. You know what I'm most afraid of? What? That I'll say no, you'll leave, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. That I'll choose safety over love and regret it for decades. But you're also afraid of choosing love and having it destroy you. Yes. They held each other in the darkness, both caught in the same impossible calculation, both understanding that some decisions can't be made through logic alone. Tell me about your parents, Sarah said suddenly. You've never mentioned them. Kale was quiet for a moment. My father was a trader. Good one. He taught me everything about reading terrain, managing supplies, negotiating with different cultures. He died when I was 17, caught in a sandstorm that came out of nowhere. My mother never recovered. She died 6 months later. The healers said it was illness, but I think it was grief. They loved each other. They did, completely. My father used to say that my mother was his compass. Without her, he couldn't find his way home. After he died, she was just lost. Couldn't find purpose without him. And that frightens you. The idea of becoming so intertwined with someone that losing them means losing yourself. Yes. Sarah's pulled back enough to look at him. I watched my parents maintain a political partnership for 40 years. They respected each other, coordinated effectively, presented a united front. But they didn't love each other. Not really. They were allies, not partners. And I always thought that was smarter, less risk, less vulnerability. What changed? Meeting you showed me what I was missing. The difference between alliance and connection. She touched his face gently. But I don't want us to be like your parents either. I don't want us so dependent on each other that we can't function independently. I want partnership, two whole people choosing to build something together, not two halves trying to make a whole. Is that possible? I think so, if we're intentional about it, if we protect our individual identities while building our shared life. Kale kissed her forehead. You're asking for something incredibly difficult, maintaining autonomy while being intimately connected. I know, but I think we're both stubborn enough to make it work. They talked through the night not about the decision directly, but about everything that fed into it. Saris told him about the pressures of leadership, the constant calculation required to maintain power while trying to do good. Kael told her about the freedom of the wasteland, the peace of being responsible only for himself, the satisfaction of simple survival. By dawn, they hadn't resolved anything, but they understood each other better. And understanding Kasil was learning was its own form of progress. The second day of travel brought them within sight of Crossing Station. It was visible from miles away, a cluster of structures built around a natural water source larger than most wasteland settlements because it served as a major trade hub. Multiple routes converged here, making it valuable real estate for merchants, transporters, and anyone moving goods across the region. It was also where the Luminary transport would arrive to collect Ceres. They made camp about an hour outside the settlement, neither quite ready to enter and make the decision real. Kael built a fire while Ceres checked her communication crystal, confirming the transport's arrival time. Dawn tomorrow, less than 18 hours. I need to tell you something, Kael said as they sat down to eat. Something I haven't told anyone. Ceres set down her food, giving him full attention. When the caravan exiled me, the leader, her name was Tessa, told me I had a choice. I could leave quietly or I could challenge the decision formally. If I challenged and won, I'd be reinstated. If I challenged and lost, I'd be marked as rebel and banned from all wanderer settlements permanently. You chose to leave quietly. I did, because I knew I was right to help that settlement, but I also knew the caravan's reasons for exile were valid from their perspective. Challenging would mean forcing them to choose sides, creating division, potentially destroying the community I'd grown up in. So you sacrificed your place to preserve theirs. I chose the less destructive option. But I've always wondered if I was just being cowardly, if standing up for my principles would have been braver than walking away. Ceres was quiet for a long moment. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm facing another version of the same choice. I can stay here, maintain my independence, avoid complication. Or I can go with you, challenge expectations, potentially create conflict. And I need to know I'm making the decision for the right reasons, not just repeating old patterns. What would be the right reasons? Kale stared into the fire. If I go with you because I love you and believe we can build something meaningful together, that's right. If I go because I'm afraid of being alone or because I'm trying to prove something to myself or others, that's wrong. If I stay because I genuinely value my independence more than our partnership, that's right. If I stay because I'm afraid of failure, that's wrong. And which is it? I don't know yet. That's the problem. Ceres moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. Can I tell you what I see, please? I see someone who's spent 3 years convincing himself that independence is the same as strength, that not needing people means you're self-sufficient rather than isolated. But Kael, you're one of the most connected people I've ever met. You read the wasteland like language. You understand the Strider's moods. You navigate social situations with different cultures effortlessly. You're not meant to be alone. You're meant to be in relationship with the land, with animals, with people. Being good at relationships isn't the same as wanting them. No, but I've watched you these past weeks. You light up when you're teaching me something. You're more animated when we're solving problems together than when you're handling them alone. You're happier now than you were when I first arrived, and it's not because the wagon is less crowded or the work is easier. It's because you have someone to share it with. Kyle knew she was right. Hated that she was right because it made the decision harder. What if I can't adapt to your world? He asked quietly. What if I try and fail spectacularly? What if I embarrass you or undermine your authority or just can't handle the pressure? Then we figure it out. Together, we adjust, adapt, find new approaches. But KL, you're acting like failure is permanent. Like if something doesn't work the first time, that's the end. But you know better. You've failed before and learned from it. Why do you think this would be different? Because the stakes are higher. Because I love you and losing you would... He stopped, unable to finish. Would hurt. Saris finished gently. I know, it would hurt me too. But love always carries that risk. There's no version where we care this much and separation doesn't cause pain. The question is whether the potential joy is worth the potential grief. Is it for you? Yes, absolutely, without hesitation. She turned to face him fully. I know what my life looks like without you. I've lived it for 29 years. It's successful by every external measure. I have power, influence, purpose. But it's empty in ways I didn't recognize until I met you. You make me laugh. You challenge my assumptions. You see me as Saris, not high arbiter. That's worth any risk. Kyle pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled like the wasteland, now dust and sun, and the particular scent of the canvas they had been living under. She'd adapted to his world so completely that she'd become part of it. Could he do the same in reverse? Could he enter her world and maintain himself while adapting enough to function? I need to walk, he said abruptly. Think, I'll be back before dark. Kale, I'm not running, I promise. I just need space to think without you looking at me with those eyes that make me want to say yes to everything you ask. She smiled despite the tension. My eyes are very compelling. Dangerously so. He walked into the wasteland following no particular path, just moving. The afternoon sun was brutal, but he barely noticed. His mind was too full. He thought about his father's compass comment, about his mother's grief, about choosing partnership that was so complete that losing it meant losing yourself. But he also thought about Tessa, the caravan leader, who'd exiled him. She'd had a partner once, another traitor named Marcus. They'd been together for 15 years when Marcus was killed in a raid. Cale had been young, but he remembered Tessa after. Devastated, yes. Broken by grief, certainly. But also still herself. Still leading. Still functioning. She'd mourned deeply and then continued living, carrying Marcus with her, but not defined solely by his loss. That was the model he needed. Not his parents' all-consuming love that couldn't survive separation, but Tessa's partnership that was profound and genuine while still allowing for individual identity. He thought about the last 3 years, about the freedom he'd claimed as his compensation for exile. It had been valuable. He'd learned self-sufficiency, developed skills proven he could survive alone. But had it been fulfilling, or had it just been safe? He'd told himself he preferred solitude. But if that were true, why had these past weeks with Saris been the happiest he could remember? Why did the thought of returning to solitary travel feel like going backward rather than forward? The sun was setting when he returned to camp. Saris was sitting by the fire and she looked up when she heard his approach. Her expression was carefully neutral, braced for whatever he might say. Kael sat down across from her. I have conditions. Hope flickered in her eyes. I'm listening. If I come, I need to maintain some independence, not just symbolic real autonomy. I need to be able to leave the crystal cities, travel the wasteland, maintain the skills and connections that make me who I am. I can't be locked in crystal towers, even beautiful ones. Agreed. We can establish regular travel schedules, diplomatic missions to outlying settlements. You'd be valuable for that anyway, bridge between Luminary and other cultures. I need to be able to refuse assignments, to say no when I think something conflicts with my principles. I can't be your puppet or your tool. I would never ask you to be. In fact, I want you to challenge me, to be the voice that questions when I'm slipping into political calculation over ethical consideration. And if your people can't accept me, if I become more liability than asset, then we reassess, together. But Kyle, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be yourself. If my people can't handle that, the problem is theirs, not yours. Kale took a deep breath. Okay. I'll come with you to the crystal cities as your partner, your consort, your... whatever the terminology is. But not because I'm giving up my life here, because I'm expanding it to include yours. Does that work? Saris was across the fire and in his arms before he could blink, her luminescence flaring bright enough to light the entire camp. Yes, yes, that works. That works perfectly. He held her tight, feeling her warmth, her joy, her relief. And underneath his own fear and uncertainty, he felt something else. Excitement, anticipation, the thrill of choosing the harder path because it led somewhere worth going. I'm terrified, he admitted. Me too. What if we fail? Then we fail together and figure out what comes next. They held each other as the stars came out, as the wasteland settled into its nighttime rhythms, as the future shifted from abstract possibility to concrete reality. Tomorrow they would board a transport to the Crystal Cities. Tomorrow KL would leave behind the life he'd built in exile and step into something entirely unknown. Tonight they had each other and the choice they'd made and the fragile, powerful hope that love might be enough foundation to build on. Tell me about the Crystal Cities, Kale said, eventually still holding her. Everything. I want to know what I'm walking into. Saris pulled back enough to see his face, her expression serious. They're beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The architecture is unlike anything in the wasteland, structures grown from crystal lattices, shaped by harmonic resonance. The main city, Lumina Prime, covers approximately 50 square miles with towers that reach thousands of feet into the sky. Light is everywhere. We don't have darkness the way you understand it. That sounds overwhelming. It is at first, but you adjust. The light becomes background like the silence is here. She paused. The social structure is rigidly hierarchical. Every person knows their place. Movement between castes is technically possible, but extremely rare. Status is determined by family lineage, educational achievement, and political connections. Where do I fit in that structure? You don't. That's both the problem and the opportunity. As my consort, you'd exist outside normal hierarchies. You'd have status through association with me, but no clear role definition. Some will see that as liberation, others as threat. The ones who tried to kill you will see it as threat. Yes, but they're arrested now. Their influence is broken. My faction is in power. For how long? That depends on how well we govern. Politics is fluid. We could hold power for decades or lose it in months. KL absorbed this. And you want me involved in that, in the constant calculation, the shifting alliances, the performance. I want you as my anchor, the person who reminds me what matters beyond power, who questions my assumptions, who helps me stay ethical in a system that often rewards pragmatism over principle. That's a heavy burden. I know, but I think you can handle it. You've been doing similar work your whole life, navigating between cultures, finding common ground, helping people who needed it despite personal cost. That was small scale, individual choices, not governance. Governance is just individual choices multiplied. Same principles, larger scope. They talked deep into the night, Saris describing the political landscape he'd be entering, the key players, the ongoing tensions. Kael asked detailed questions, already thinking tactically about how to navigate the situation. At some point, exhaustion caught up with them. They fell asleep, tangled together. Saris's luminescence dimming to a soft glow, Kael's arms wrapped around her protectively. When Kael woke, dawn was breaking, and Saris was already up, packing her few belongings with practiced efficiency. She'd changed into formal robes she'd been carrying, deep blue crystal-woven fabric that caught the early light and refracted it into rainbow patterns. She looked like what she was, High Arbiter Council member, person of immense power and responsibility. Kael felt a moment of pure panic. What was he doing? He was a wasteland trader, an exile, someone who owned one wagon and a cranky animal. He had no business entering her world. Then Saris turned and saw his expression. She crossed to him immediately, still in her formal robes, and took his hands. "Second thoughts," she asked gently. "100th thoughts, but I am still coming. You don't have to, I would understand. I know, but I'm choosing this. I'm terrified, but I'm choosing it." She kissed him softly. "We'll figure it out together." The transport arrived precisely at dawn, descending from the sky, with barely a whisper of sound, luminary technology at its finest. It was a sleek vessel, all curves and crystal panels, nothing like the rough functionality of wasteland vehicles. A ramp extended, and two luminary guards emerged, both in formal armor. They saw Saris and immediately dropped to one knee. "High Arbiter," the lead guard said, "we're here to return you home." "Rise," Saris commanded, her voice taking on the formal tone Kale had rarely heard. "I will return, but not alone. Kale of the Wanderer people travels with me as my chosen consort and advisor." The guards exchanged glances. Clearly, this wasn't in their briefing. High Arbiter regulations require advance clearance for Outlanders to enter luminary space. "I am aware of regulations. I wrote several of them. Kael enters under my personal authority. If anyone objects, they can raise the matter with the council after our arrival." Her tone left no room for argument. The guard hesitated, then nodded. "As you command, High Arbiter." Kael retrieved his essential belongings from the wagon, his tools, his personal items, the few things that mattered. The wagon and the strider he'd arranged to sell to a trader at Crossing Station. Everything else was just stuff. He took one last look at the wasteland, at the endless red expanse that had been his home for 3 years. Part of him would always belong here, but another part was ready to discover what lay beyond. Saris took his hand. "Ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." They walked up the ramp together, leaving the wasteland behind and stepping into a future neither could fully predict. As the transport doors closed and the vessel began to rise, Kale felt the ground fall away beneath him, literally and metaphorically. He was airborne now, committed. There was no turning back. Saris squeezed his hand. "Welcome to the next adventure." Kale squeezed back. "Try not to let me embarrass you." "Impossible. You're going to challenge everything they think they know about Outlanders. That's exactly what I'm counting on." The transport climbed higher, and through the crystal viewport, Kael watched the wasteland shrink below. Somewhere down there was the spot where he'd found Saris in that net, where he'd made the choice that had led to this moment. He'd cut her down without hesitation. Now she was lifting him up in return, carrying him into a world he didn't understand, toward a future he couldn't predict. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. He realized exactly what he needed. The wasteland fell away behind them, and the crystal cities rose ahead, gleaming in the distance like impossible dreams made solid. Kale took a deep breath and prepared to discover whether a nobody trader could become something more, whether love was enough foundation to build a life on, whether choosing the hard path would lead somewhere worth going. He didn't know the answers yet, but for the first time in 3 years he was willing to find out.